Thank you, everybody, and welcome. I'm so glad to see so many people here. I know some of you have heard me speak before, so you'll hear a little bit of repetition, but I'll try to make it interesting. Okay, so we all kind of know the problem, and what we want to do is we want to be able to shift from fossil fuels to renewables in really record time. But a lot of times there have been, when I've listened to Ray's presentation and others, you have a lot of scientific graphs about why it's important to do that, and all of those really make an impact on me. But I wondered if there was a graph that I could make that would be even more personal to that. And so what I came up with was how CO2 has increased over the history of my near family and predecessors. When my grandpa was born, when my great-grandfather was born, about the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, there was 285 parts per million of CO2 in the atmosphere, which is kind of where it had bounced around from there to lower for thousands of years. My grandpa was born in 1886, about 34 years later, and it was then 293 parts per million. It had gone up just a little bit, not a whole lot, but it was at that point in time that scientists started recognizing that there may in fact be an issue with burning CO2. My dad was born about 34 years later, and yep, it's up a little higher. So this is my dad's year, 303. I was born in 46, I was the first of the baby boom generation, so that's now up to 310. Not too bad, but increasing, steadily. My son was born in 1984. I was a late mother. And so at that point, we were up to 344 points per million. He is now 33 years old and, ready for the next generation to emerge, and it has gone from here to there. So this is the rapidity with which CO2 has risen in my son's lifetime. Now, if we extrapolate out another 33 years, if we don't do something really significant, you can see where we're going to be headed, okay? So that's why it's important for me to be working on this and to begin to lower those emissions. We know that we put out emissions in all sectors of our environment, that we are all responsible for that. And so we look at a solution that will in fact impact our whole economy and our whole way of living. So the solution is that economists tell us in order to lower CO2 significantly and quickly, we have to put a price on carbon, on the actual cost that carbon is wreaking on our environment. Currently, fossil fuel is very, very inexpensive in our country and around the world, and the costs are all externalized. So what we need to do is put a cost on carbon that will internalize or begin to capture the costs, the true costs of carbon. There are basically 5 ways that we can do that. And these ways are the status quo, which is not particularly effective. Continuing to do what we're doing and expecting different results is insanity. Regulation, boots on the ground, we'll talk about that briefly. Cap and trade, which we have some experience with. A carbon tax, and then the solution that CCL looks at. So I'm going to go quickly through each of those. So we know that extreme weather events are costing us lots of money. I'm sure John Lindsay talked about that during his presentation, and the fact that we're looking at more and more extreme events coming up in the future if we don't do something serious. And even if we do something serious, we've already locked in a certain amount of damage to the planet that we're just going to have to learn to live with. So those costs will simply increase if we don't take some effective action. And the cost of life, loss of life and instability, military costs will increase. All of those things go up. The regulation is another way in which we can attempt to decrease our CO2 emissions. The EPA was headed in that direction under the Obama administration, but we know that regulations are only as good as the pen that stands behind them. And so those regulations now are being dismantled under the current administration. So they're piecemeal and patchwork at best, and they are not obviously something that we can count on. The cap and trade is something that we have experience with here in California. We're currently having to be in negotiations in our state assembly and senate about how we are going to proceed in the future, because our cap and trade legislation is going to expire in 2020. And while it's done some good things, there's been lots of controversy about it all along. It's required a tremendous amount of legislation and increased bureaucracy. And so to look at a cap and trade across the country as a way of putting a price on carbon that could then be expanded to the whole world is a little bit unyielding. And it would take way much more time than we have. The next thing that we can look at is to put actually just a tax on carbon. And when you hear people in Washington say, we can't tax carbon, it will ruin our economy, this is the kind of tax that they're talking about. It's called a sin tax. If you want people to do less of something, you simply tax it higher and higher until they quit. We've done that relatively effectively with cigarettes. We've done that with alcohol in some places. Philadelphia is dealing with that with sugar. So we can begin to apply taxes to different segments of our economy, and that use drops. And that's a pretty effective way. But remember that fossil fuel is across our economy in all aspects of our life. So if in fact we were just to tax it in this way, it would in fact ruin our economy, and we don't want you to do that. So that's not what CCL advocates for. What we advocate for is this last one, which is a carbon fee and dividend. And I'm going to spend the rest of the time talking now about what CCL does, what we're advocating for, and the progress that we've made. And that's the good news that I'm going to bring to you today. So our revenue neutral carbon fee and dividend, I'm going to explain how it works. CCL started in 2007 with 2 members. Actually, Marshall Saunders was all by himself, but soon he was joined by this guy called Stephen Valk, who worked as our first volunteer. And then he was able to talk a couple of people into coming on board as the first staff members. And that all took about a year to get going. And then, since then, we have grown steadily. We now have chapters across the United States, around 400 chapters in the United States and Canada, and around the rest of the world. Those chapters have done nothing but increase since January of this year, and our volunteers have increased since January of this year tremendously, both locally and around the world. So what we advocate for is a situation that's like this. We want to apply a fee to carbon upstream as far as we possibly can, at the well, at the mine, at the border, if we're importing fossil fuels. And we want to start that relatively low. We actually would start it at about $15 a ton, but the study that looked at our proposal started it at $10 a ton, so that's what we're going to talk about. So it's going to be $10 a ton, and then every year we would in fact raise it $10 a ton. So that gives a predictability. Unlike our cap and trade, which has had absolutely no predictability for businesses over the last decade that has been around, you can't tell me today what it costs to buy a permit. I don't know, you don't know, I'm sure. So we just, it has no predictability. But what we want to do is build in predictability for businesses, because that's what they long for. And it's also what will tip the scale for us quickly. So building up to $10 a year. So after 10 years, we would have carbon priced at $100 a metric ton, CO2 equivalent. And we would price not only fossil fuels, we would price all the other greenhouse gases, methane, the chloroflora, hydrocarbons, whatever those, multisyllabic gases are. So we would apply all of that, and all of that money would flow into the U.S. Treasury. And if we stopped there, that would be a carbon tax. But we want to, in fact, give that 100%, or as close to that as we possibly can, less expenses, back to U.S. households on a per-person equal share basis for every adult, and up to 2 children per family would get half share per child, up to 2 children per family. So a family of 4 with 2 parents, 2 children would get 3 equal shares a year in dividend back. And it doesn't matter whether that household earns minimum wage or they're mega rich. It really doesn't matter. They get the same amount of money back. And that would then help them deal with the raising in prices, because we know that when we apply this fee across the board to fossil fuels, that everything that fossil fuels touch are going to go up in price, and that's going to be everything. It's going to be our utilities, our food, or everything that's manufactured, driving, the whole deal. So everything's going to get more costly, and so the dividend would allow people to meet those expenses, increased expenses. Meanwhile, everything that is produced with renewable energy would become less expensive, especially by comparison. This is where the market begins to really help us do the switch, because when non-fossil fuel manufactured products are cheaper, if you have, for instance, Patagonia is going to go all fossil fuel free, as opposed to some other sportswear manufacturer that's equal quality, but they're using fossil fuel to manufacture. Patagonia will then begin selling theirs cheaper. Whose are you going to buy? You're going to buy Patagonia's. We all do that. We want the best deal for the least money. And that's what our financial system is based on. So that market will begin to drive. And then, because it's predictable for businesses, they will begin to see, oh, okay, so I can project 10, 20 years ahead, and I will know exactly what my energy will cost me 10 years from now, 20 years from now, additional to what it would cost without this fee. I can see that it's cost effective for me right now or 3 years from now to make the conversion of my plant to a clean energy system. And they will begin to do that faster and faster. And also the research dollars, when science begins to see, okay, we're really serious about this, they will begin to, all the scientific research money and technological research money, R&D research money, will get funneled into the green technologies. They're already starting to do that. It will just happen faster. So all of that will begin to happen, and happen relatively quickly as soon as we can get a predictable cost on carbon instituted. Okay, so one of the things that we did was we had this organization called REMI, which is Regional Economic Modeling Company. They do economic modeling for all kinds of businesses and for states and counties around the country. Scrupulously nonpartisan. They are just economic advisors in terms of what will a project cost you, what can you expect as a return. And what they found was that if they instituted this plan, $10 initially, $10 a year going up for 20 years, that we in fact would create millions of new jobs. Now this was really important for us because the major complaint in Washington is this would be a job killer. And in fact what they said is no, this plan in place as opposed to not being in place, you would end up with millions of new jobs. And in fact it's about 250, no, that's not true, that's another slide, about 2.5 million new jobs. And of course, what we wanted to do was to make sure that we were going to a green economy and lowering fossil fuels. So what it also showed us was that in 10 years, across the board, clean energy would become cheaper than carbon-based energy, any kind of carbon-based energy, not just coal, any kind. That was what we wanted to have happen. And that our reductions would begin to really fall. Now, this green line, this brown line is where we've been with cap and trade and all the other things we've been doing. It's been coming down, but without a price on carbon, we're going to drop a little more, and then it's just going to level out because we can't keep up. And with instituting this, it will continue to fall, and it will fall 50% below 1990 levels by 2035, and 90% below by 2050, which is where scientists tell us we need to be. Okay, so the next thing we want to do is take a look at how it would affect households. And I also have data now about how it would affect our particular congressional district households, which I've given to Salud Carbajal. But across the board, across the United States, what it would do for families would be to increase steadily over those 20 years. At first, the fee's little, so they would get a little back, and it would grow and grow to the point where it would, where a family of 4 would end up with approximately $400 a month in extra income. So that would be a big boon to our economy. That's why it doesn't hurt our economy. It, in fact, stimulates our economy. Our program would put a carbon fee and tax on border and have a border adjustment so that goods coming into our country would not be able to be sold without that tax being applied to keep us competitive. And likewise, products being exported would be rebated that tax. That would help other countries begin to institute their own similar price on carbon. And in addition, we would have 250,000 lives saved over the course of those 20 years because we'd be reducing the particulate matter in the atmosphere. So, in summary, our program would do all of these good things. So you would think that it would have been rapidly embraced, right? But no. In 2010, it was clearly like this in Congress. And when we first started lobbying, that was the year we first started lobbying in person on the Hill in mass. Well, in mass, there were 60, maybe 16 people or 20 people that first year. I don't know how many people, not too many. 210, or in 2010, people were saying to us, don't bother talking to those Republicans. They're not going to listen. And Republicans would say, I don't want to hear it. Don't even talk to me about climate change. Over those intervening years, however, by applying the levers of influence that we have, which are direct lobbying and letters to our congresspeople, we have kept that up, and that's only increased. Every year, that increases tremendously by thousands of people who are writing and every day, and every single congressperson now has a CCL liaison assigned to them that we keep in constant contact with people. We write opinion letters and letters to the editor. That increases every year, and reaching out to people at the grassroots level and at the grass tops community level, which I'll talk more about. So we started in 2015 to begin to see some real progress. That's when the conservative environmental stewardship started happening under Chris Gibson. He first put out a House Resolution 424, which recognized, and it was signed on by 13 other Republicans, recognized that climate change was happening and that we needed to do something about it. That resolution has been reintroduced every single year. This year it was reintroduced by Representative Elisa Stefanik as 195, and it now has 20 Republican co-sponsors. The next thing that happened was In March or April of 2015, the House Republican Energy, Innovation, and Environmental Working Group started. Currently has 15 members. These are all Republicans who are looking at ways in which they can take into account climate change when they're dealing with the economy and energy issues. And the really big thing that we were so excited about was in February of 2015, Representative Curbelo, a Republican, and Representative Deutsch, Democrat, both from South Florida, who are rapidly sinking into the ocean, got together and they started the Bipartisan Climate Solutions Caucus. And that grew over the first few months. And I think by the end of 2015, we had 13 pairs. The absolute requirement for joining this group is that if you're a Republican, you have to find a Democrat, and if you're a Democrat, you have to find a Republican. They refer to themselves as the Noah's Ark Caucus. And you have to, if you want to join, you have to absolutely be serious about finding a solution to climate change. So they grew, and at the end of 2015, we were at 13 members each, I think, or 13 pair. Yeah, 13 members each. So, but then the election decimated that because only 6 Republicans were returned to office, these 6, and 9 Democrats were returned to office. The rest either retired or didn't win their elections. And so 9 and 6 at the beginning of this year, we thought, oh my goodness, got to gain ground. And so we began doing that. And these stars that I've put on this and other slides, these indicate that these are freshman congressmen coming in. So right away, these 3 people joined to fill out the pairs. And then we started adding people relatively quickly. And we started adding, and we kept adding, and here's our own congressman who joined in April. He heard about this in mid-March, and by April 23rd, he had announced that he had found his partner and would join. So he is very committed to working bipartisan. And these, so this is where we were when I went back to Washington in June to lobby again. And these are 2 of the Republicans that committed during lobby day to joining our caucus. There were this caucus. And there are 2 more who have said that they are going to. We're awaiting their announcements. We can't put their names out there until they tell us that it's okay. So we're now up to the total of, 46? I think 46 members. So what we figure is that we need 52 members. That gives us 26 Republicans. The Freedom Caucus is 26 members, and we know what kind of power they yield in Congress. So if we can get 26 members who are committed to putting a price on carbon, that are Republican, we feel like we have a pretty good chance of beginning to get that conversation really underway. So this year, the good thing that's happened is the Climate Leadership Council, which is a conservative think tank group, has put out their own proposed conservative dividends plan, is what they're calling it. Conservative dividends program, I guess it is, or climate dividends program. And they have some really heavy hitters. And they announced this in February. They went to the White House. They presented it. I think Ivanka was pretty interested. And so they are working to get this on the table. There are some significant differences, but there's a lot of overlap with our plan. And we're really, really happy to see this plan on the table because that means the sausage making can start to happen between the more conservative plan, the maybe more liberal plan, and we can start to address those issues that are different between the 2 plans. And they will be significant things to address, but there's a real chance of being able to come up and meet the goal that CCL set last year, which was to have a carbon fee and dividend proposal on the table and passed by the end of this year. Another interesting and very positive thing that has happened, anybody know about Our Children's Trust? This is the group that Lou Helmuth is the lead attorney on it, and it's the group of 20-some youngsters who are suing the federal government and suing different states for not taking effective action against climate change because they're endangering their constitutional rights to life and liberty and happiness. And they have now gotten through several court hurdles and in fact will be going to trial on this in February 2018. So this is a big deal. The big fossil fuel organizations attempted to intervene in this and get it thrown out. They did not hold water in the courts. So the judge has now set a trial date, and this would be an interesting one for you to watch. They have a great website, and I'd encourage you to tune into it. So we're continuing to exercise our levers of influence. Barry, other people have joined us from your congregation, and I would really encourage anybody else to do that. But what I really want to talk with you about today is this Grass Tops program that we have. We started this last year, and it was for the sole purpose of getting more and more visibility for our member of Congress that he has the support to move forward with advancing this kind of program in Congress. And what I'd like to do is ask that your faith community be able to endorse a carbon revenue neutral program, such as CCL's, as a way of moving forward on this. And I have a couple of forms that you can either, if you don't feel comfortable endorsing our program specifically, you can endorse that you take action on climate change. And these endorsements go to our member of Congress so that he can see how serious his constituents are about wanting this done. So that would be my ask for you all today. We are getting close to this, and I am really hopeful about that. This last time in Washington I've gone, this was my third trip back. I went in 2013, 2016, and then this year. And our reception is just more and more favorable every time. We're welcome people. It was super easy to get appointments with a lot of people this year. We had 1,300 volunteers show up to lobby on Capitol Hill, and that's up over, last year we had 1,100 show up. We have to cap it at 1,000 people. That's all that we actually can use in appointments, but 300 more people came just to be on site and to make a presence known. So that's the kind of thing we have. We have a great reception now in our Member of Congress office, and across the country we're making progress. So I encourage you to join us if you can with that endorsement. And with that, I will end for questions and answers.